It's close to midnight, and scientists are just beginning their day. Moored in the North Pacific, they're jigging for squid. But the squid they want to catch is far from ordinary. It's a messenger of change, a voracious predator native to Mexican waters. And now, it's raiding the Canadian coast. Strange days are dawning in the global sea. Creatures are on the move. Dead zones are expanding, and the foundation of life is slowly eroding. Scientists around the world are in a race to understand those changes and what they'll mean for thousands of species, including ours. On the west coast of Vancouver Island, a fishing boat heads into port to offload its catch. It's been an unusual season for hake fisherman Corey Gale. The predator from Mexico has invaded his fishing grounds.
I was quite surprised. We just caught Humboldt squid, and we're only 8 miles off Ukilit where we caught this fish, and Humboldt's right up here. The amount that we're seeing now in the area, it's just unprecedented, really. It is impacting our fishery because they are showing up in our nets, and the hake that come up with them, half of them are chewed. They're chewed right up. They're half eaten. This is a smaller Humboldt. We've weighed mantles at 25 pounds, just the mantle itself. They got a pretty nasty little beak in here. It's like a little parrot beak. So they can eat. You could walk on the squid on the surface. They come right up, and they'll actually, I've seen them come up and grab seagulls off the surface, grabbing on their toes and ripping their toes off trying to eat them. It's unbelievable.
On board the W.E. Ricker, scientists are racing to assess the impact this squid is having on the local fishery. Right now, they're trawling for hake, part of a survey that sets next year's quota for one of the biggest fisheries on the West Coast. But this year, they're netting fewer hake and a lot more predatory squid.
In 1998, I remember we caught, I think, one jumbo squid. In fact, I didn't know what it was. In 2007, we end up with 80. In this year, 2009, we have been following squid in a very identifiable layer from the Canadian-US border right on up to Queen Charlotte Sound, where we are now.
And they know that because this year, they're not just counting hake. For the first time, they're also surveying the squid. Using acoustical instruments to identify its location, they confirm what they're seeing at night by jigging, because that's when the squid feeds near the surface.
As the night gets darker, you get to 2 in the morning, everything's moved up in the water column. The hand jigs are only working the top 10 or 20 meters, and the machine produces its best within the top 50 meters of the water. So the squid are right up near the surface. When they're brought in on the jigs, you can see other squid chasing them up as well. When we were doing the acoustic work, we saw a large layer, and that layer went on for miles. If you have a school or a population that's spread over that kind of an area, you'd be talking about millions of squid.
And that's a lot of hungry squid eating a lot of fish. In a lifespan of just 1 or 2 years, the Humboldt can grow into a 2-meter-long, 45-kilogram predator. To get that big that fast, it's constantly feeding. And it doesn't eat alone. This squid hunts in packs and feeds on whatever is available, from krill and hake to its own kind. But this year, the squid isn't just eating hake, it's changing its behavior.
There is a change in the distribution pattern of hake. They're down deeper, they're more dispersed. We haven't seen the abundance that might be expected in our waters. I'm pretty sure I'm seeing some change in schooling behavior as a result of the squid.
And that's not the only change Ken and his colleagues have seen. A fish that traditionally spawns off California, the hake now seems to be breeding up here because the team is catching a lot more juveniles. And that could pose a serious threat in the future.
Sure, they're spawning off of our waters, but are the young surviving? They may not have the same sort of environment to survive in as a young fish as they did in California Bight, for instance. So that's a threat.
So what's pushing the hake and Humboldt further and further north? Some 2,000 kilometers south in Monterey Bay, California, deep-sea pioneer Bruce Robeson witnessed phase 1 of the Humboldt's northward migration. On a day like this, in 1998, he and his team lowered their camera-mounted ROV into the ocean. When they get to the control room and switch on the camera, they see this, the Humboldt squid.
We can get more of a look at that. That would be great.
Robeson has been conducting underwater surveys since the mid-1980s, and he's never seen this particular squid before.
And is there a statistical test you can run on that to show it's not a fluke?
Over the next few years, Robeson searches for clues to explain the sudden invasion. Lack of predation may be part of the problem. Big predators have been fished out in the squid's home range.
Recent estimates suggest that 90% of the big fishes, the tunas, the billfishes, have been fished out. Those big fishes eat the baby squid. In response to that, in the home range, the squid population grew and grew and grew and grew.
But an exploding population doesn't tell the whole story, so Robeson looks back at the records. Fishermen have seen this squid before, during warmer periods, and the year Robeson spots them is one of the warmest on record.
We saw no evidence of Humboldt squid until the 1997-98 El Niño. And when that slug of warm water moved into Monterey Bay, Humboldt squid came with it. We looked back at our data sets and realized that they had had an impact on the community. The numbers of hake had dropped off significantly while they were here. And then in 2002, there was a little El Niño, but the squid came back, and they've been here ever since. I think that episodic range expansions during El Niño periods were a natural process. But the fact that that door has been forced open and now stays open is our responsibility.
And it's our responsibility because of this. Thanks to a blanket of carbon dioxide produced by the burning of fossil fuels, the planet's warmest climate cycle, El Niño, may be getting more persistent. That cycle originates in the tropics, but it seems to be driving up ocean temperatures in many other regions of the global sea.
Climate change certainly contributes to the fact that the Humboldt squid are moving north in the northern hemisphere and south in the southern hemisphere. We're making the waters that they are now inhabiting much more welcoming to the squid. And it's highly likely that a lot of other species are undergoing the same kind of process.
And that process may be well underway. According to recent estimates, the world's fish stocks are swimming poleward at a rate of 40 to 60 kilometers per decade.
If the climate modelers are right, what we'll get is a shift in where species can live. Some places might be so perturbed by these new species coming in that they can't function the way they used to be and functionally collapse. Others may be just fine. That's something that people are all over the world scrambling to find out, because we have this window of time to try to estimate which ecosystems are more at risk and then how the climate is going to affect that.
But invading species aren't the only threat. Scientists like Steve Palumbi are equally concerned about plants and animals that can't move. Many are sensitive to temperature, and some form the foundation of entire ecosystems. Here in Monterey Bay, kelp forests are the primary coastal ecosystem, life support for thousands of creatures that live above the water and below it. A favorite dive location for the resident sea otter and for biologist Steve Palumbi.
Clear?
Peaceful, majestic, and teeming with life, kelp forests are found in cool coastal waters around the world, and they're among the most productive and dynamic ecosystems on the planet.
The productivity of it churns out a whole set of species of fish and vertebrates. Not only feed on the water and the plankton in it, but they also feed on the kelp, and they feed on the nutrients that the kelp dumps back into the water itself.
But giant kelp does best in water temperatures of 10 to 18 degrees. So if temperature continues to climb, this ecosystem will be at risk.
All of the ocean is changing in its temperature, and that means that you can't get away from it. Every ecosystem, kelp forests, seagrass beds, oyster reefs, coral reefs, they all are feeling the brunt of this same problem.
But heat isn't the only problem they're facing. In 2006, in the deep ocean off Oregon, thousands of creatures suddenly disappeared, and scientists raced out to sea to find out why. The Pacific Ocean just off Cape Perpetua, Oregon. A bountiful ecosystem that's produced enough fish and crabs to support generations of fishermen. But in 2002, a strange mystery begins to unfold here. Fishermen send out alarming reports, dead or dying Dungeness crabs coming up in their traps. Others, like Al Pizar, witness even stranger events.
The crabs ran offshore, inshore to the surf line, or to the north out of the zone, as did the fish off the reefs. Some reefs down off of Cape Perpetua were found to be vacant of fish.
We immediately thought, as did much of the public, that it was a toxin. Something in the water was killing things. And we hurriedly looked at the records. I had some from offshore. My colleagues had them from right near shore. And we quickly compared them and found that it was low oxygen.
Around Cape Perpetua area in particular, you could smell the decaying organisms. We saw a unique occurrence. In the summertime, there's usually an octopus spawn, and the little baby octopus, 1.5 inches long. They were actually climbing up our crab ropes, and we saw dozens of little octopus in their attempt to escape the low oxygen at the bottom, getting up to the surface.
The strange events off Cape Perpetua send ocean scientists Francis Chan and Jack Barth out to sea to investigate why oxygen levels are dropping, training their sensors on what will come to be known as the Oregon Dead Zone.
Well, it was scary because the question is, well, how big is this and how long is this going to last? We thought that that was just a once-in-a-lifetime event. But every year since then, we've been able to track this reappearance of low oxygen water on a continental shelf.
So what's causing the return of the low oxygen zone? Barth and Chan immediately rule out fertilizer runoff because there are no major rivers emptying into this coast.
In most dead zones, it's from nutrients running off from the rivers, creating these enormous plankton blooms. Those choke the waters, decay, and pull the oxygen out. Off our coast, the nutrients come from offshore deep water. That cycle is natural, but it's the alteration that we're seeing. We kind of think of it as an arrhythmia, so a change in the natural rhythms.
And the natural rhythms here are set by a process called upwelling. During the summer, powerful winds from the north drive the nutrient-rich waters of the deep up to the surface. Those nutrients feed life forms like this, millions of microscopic plants called phytoplankton. Food for countless creatures, this astonishing floating forest fuels one of the most valuable ecosystems on the planet.
Well, we're actually really lucky to be working in such a productive ecosystem because there aren't that many places in the world's ocean that's like this. And these upwelling ecosystems, they're really small in the area, maybe 1% of the world's ocean, but they're responsible for nearly 25% of the wild fish catches. So we're seeing this amazing community of rockfish. There's a lot of different species down here. Supporting some of these fishes are this amazingly rich community of marine invertebrates. So we're seeing some sea cucumbers. They're like ants at a picnic, right? They're everywhere. There are actually about 7 different kinds of sea stars down there. And this is what a healthy and productive ecosystem can look like off the Oregon coast.
And it's phytoplankton that helps support this amazing ecosystem. But too much plankton can be too much of a good thing. In 2006, unusually large phytoplankton blooms begin to form off the Oregon coast. The blooms go on for weeks, and a deadly process spins into motion. Dead phytoplankton rains into the depths as marine snow, where it's consumed by bacteria that burns up oxygen at a furious rate. For the first time, levels bottom out to 0, and 3,000 square kilometers of ocean become an oxygen-starved killing zone.
We saw no fish during this period because all the fish either died or they just fled and tried to find waters that are richer in oxygen. This was a beautiful Pycnopodia star, literally degrading and disintegrating and rotting in front of our eyes.
Only a major disruption in the upwelling cycle could cause such a devastating loss of life. And by 2006, Barth and Chan suspect that climate change is the main culprit.
Way off the corner there, Mike. Grab the other boat hook.
Global warming seems to be driving stronger winds, and stronger winds are supercharging the upwelling process. But there's another massive change happening some 500 kilometers north that may also be driving down oxygen levels in the Oregon Dead Zone. Just off Canada, in the subarctic Pacific, the deep ocean is undergoing a disturbing transformation, one that Frank Whitney has been monitoring for over a decade. For more than 50 years, chemical oceanographers like Whitney have journeyed across the same 1,400 kilometers of subarctic sea, sampling seawater and measuring its properties. And after surveying more than 5 decades of oxygen data, Whitney makes a shocking discovery. The deep ocean here is also losing oxygen.
There was a distinct trend over time, a 22% decline in oxygen from about 150 to 600 meters. It's a huge drop. My evidence from deep ocean suggested that a good part of the story was due to reduced ventilation of the ocean.
And ventilation is the main way the ocean breathes. Most oxygen is absorbed at the surface of the subpolar seas. Winter storms cool the surface water, making it heavy enough to sink. Like a deep breath, that sinking water transports oxygen into the depths. But as the planet heats up and glaciers melt, ocean breathing is slowing down. Flooded with fresh water, the surface layer is too light to sink, and that's cutting off the oxygen supply in the deep ocean.
And you can actually see gentle oxygen loss, a gentle slope towards oxygen loss even down at 800 meters.
It is very evident in the subarctic Pacific, but it's also being picked up in the North Atlantic, where there is also a freshening of the surface ocean. So if this problem really gets rooted in the North Atlantic, then you're looking at something that is going to carry through most of the world's oceans.
And if you look at the trouble caused here by just a 22% decline in oxygen, you get a sense of the global threat, especially to deep-dwelling groundfish like halibut.
We're seeing evidence now of some frightening changes in the habitat for a lot of the groundfish along the BC coast. And this is a really diverse community of fish, more than 30 species. Groundfish are losing its deep population. It's scary because a lot of fish that are unable to tolerate low oxygen either get crowded into a narrower habitat or they're going to be forced into northward migrations up into areas where there is more oxygen.
But that's not Whitney's only concern. As low oxygen or hypoxic zones expand, it's not just fish that will suffer.
When we think of hypoxic waters becoming shallower along the BC coast, we have to think about impacts to all the organisms that can't move out of their habitat. And a lot of those organisms are probably very important for just keeping the ecosystem healthy. The sponges and corals on the coast, some of them very unique to the BC coast. Hypoxia is going to stress them, there's no question.
But it's not just subarctic species that are at risk, because the low oxygen waters here are carried all the way down this coast on the California current. Deep water that's fueling the Oregon Dead Zone and threatening the entire North American coast.
We have very precise measurements over many, many years, and we can detect a trend that is going to lower and lower oxygen, and it's the same trend from Vancouver, British Columbia, down through Oregon, down through Monterey Bay, down into Southern California, and even connecting down to the equator. So I think you can call it a global phenomena that we've got to keep our eyes on.
And it truly is a global problem. On the South African and South American coasts, dead zones like the one in Oregon are getting worse, and low oxygen zones are expanding in the tropical seas. And that could affect a whole host of marine species. That's why Bruce Robeson is studying its impact in the deep ocean off Monterey Bay. He uses this equipment to measure the oxygen intake of jelly-like animals, creatures that may represent as much as a third of all ocean life, and spend a lot of time below 150 meters, where oxygen is dropping.
Many gelatinous animals appear to be able to deal with low oxygen quite well. Others are apparently restricted.
If the levels of low oxygen in the ocean expand, we suspect that that will cause a decrease in biodiversity as animals are driven out of their former habitat.
In other words, those creatures that can adapt will. Those that can't may simply disappear. But there's one critter that seems to be coping with low oxygen pretty well, because Robeson has observed the Humboldt squid moving with ease in the oxygen-starved depths.
Every animal, every living system has a range of tolerance. We don't know what that range is for the Humboldt squid, but based on the fact that we've seen it operate successfully in a broad range of temperatures, oxygen concentrations, salinities, short term, they will probably be one of the winners.
But there's something occurring that even the Humboldt squid may not survive. The chemistry of the ocean is changing, and that could spell disaster for life in the global sea. Almost 2 trillion metric tons of carbon dioxide. That's what we've released into the atmosphere in just 200 years. And more than a quarter has been absorbed by the ocean. As a result, seawater is becoming more acidic. Scientists Richard Feely and Debbie Ianson have been tracking ocean acidification on the North Pacific coast. They and other scientists predict a massive upsurge by the end of this century, as much as a 200% increase in ocean acidity.
This is more than we have seen over the last 20 to 25 million years. About 22 million tons of carbon dioxide every day goes into the oceans. And we have always thought in the past that this was a good thing because the uptake of carbon dioxide reduces global warming. But we have now found that the impact of that uptake of carbon dioxide in our ocean ecosystem is really quite dramatic, and we're very concerned about that.
A great deal of that carbon is being absorbed by the ocean. The ocean is the largest reservoir of active carbon on the planet. It ultimately controls what the atmospheric CO2 concentration is. The carbon that's coming from our cars and factories, etc., that carbon enters at the surface. And the organisms that we depend upon, much of the life is in the surface because that's where the light is.
And once that carbon dioxide gets into the ocean, it reacts with seawater, forming carbonic acid and consuming carbonate ions. Double jeopardy for calcifying creatures like these. In the future, they won't have enough calcium carbonate to build their shells, and too much carbonic acid may dissolve the shells they already have. And the same fate may be facing the world's coral reefs, one of the largest and most important ocean ecosystems in the world. Millions of creatures depend on these reefs for survival. So if they disappear, many other species will vanish with them. Biological oceanographer Chris Langdon has been studying the impact of acidification on corals for more than a decade. Today, he's heading out to dive on a reef just off the Florida Keys.
I just look forward to getting out of the office and getting out here on the reef. Just makes me very sad to think that what I'm seeing here today, my children and grandchildren may not get to experience because of the rapid decline of the conditions of the reefs.
Pollution, disease, global warming. From Florida to Australia, almost 20% of the world's corals have already been lost, thanks to us. And the rest may be claimed by ocean acidification. Despite their stone-like appearance, these hard corals are very much alive, made up of thousands of identical creatures that build protective outer skeletons.
The organisms I'm particularly interested in are the hard corals that build a limestone skeleton from dissolved calcium and carbonate ions in the seawater. And as the oceans become more acidic, the carbonate ion concentration declines, and that's really why the corals are sensitive to it.
And Langdon's experiments show just how sensitive they are. He's been studying different hard corals, placing them in tanks at different carbon dioxide levels, one normal, the other at levels predicted for the end of this century. And his measurements tell a shocking story. The corals all look healthy, but in high CO2, growth rates plummet by 40 to 60%.
There's no smoking gun that tells you these corals are unhappy. But if you make these careful measurements of their growth, you see that in fact they're very unhappy. At some point in the future, which we call a threshold concentration, they'll stop growing altogether.
And corals that stop growing will eventually erode away, perhaps never to be replaced, because acidification may also erode their ability to reproduce. And reproduction is one of the most miraculous cycles in a coral's life. With their visual sensors timed to the light of the moon, corals release their spawn. They do it on the same night, at virtually the same time, and only when the water is just the right temperature.
They release their larvae during new moons or full moons during just a few months out of the year. Other colonies of the same species remotely are doing the same thing, so there's an opportunity for the eggs and sperm to come together, because otherwise the ocean's a very vast space.
And given that vast space, it's no surprise that juvenile survival rates may be as low as 1 to 6%.
This is why it's really crucial and why we're worried that if those numbers start to plummet even further, that what that means for coral reefs.
And that's why Langdon and graduate student Rebecca Albright are out on the reefs today to assess how acidification will impact the early stages of coral life. Albright has permission from the Florida Keys Marine Sanctuary to harvest corals that are ready to spawn. Today's target is the aptly named Mustard Hill coral. The samples will be taken to the lab for acidification experiments. Right now, these corals aren't having any problem doing what comes naturally. Eventually, the larvae will make their way to an old reef where they'll settle, attach, and continue to grow. But in this case, the journey will be slightly different. These corals are actually spawning in a lab tank, and we only see them glow with the help of special lights and filters. The same is true for Albright, who uses yellow goggles and blue light to collect the larvae.
I then use them for settlement experiments. And so what I've done is taken limestone chips, comparable to what they would be settling on an old reef, and I've conditioned them for about 1 to 2 months in different carbon dioxide levels.
And the preliminary results suggest that as CO2 levels go up, survival rates go down, which means even fewer juveniles building fewer colonies.
That it's having a major effect on the early development of coral larvae of a couple different species. If the replacement rate by sexual reproduction doesn't keep up, then populations are just doomed to decline over time.
And that could spell disaster for countless species, including ours.
About a quarter of all the fish life in the ocean spends some part of their life cycle on a reef. A lot of people depend for quite a large share of their protein on the fish they catch on the reef. I hope people can understand this and realize that food just doesn't come from a store. It comes from real live plants and animals that need clean air, clean water to survive just as we do, and we need to take care of them.
And if we don't take care, it won't just be coral reefs that suffer, because acidification could destroy some of the most important creatures in the global sea. They're called zooplankton, tiny animals that sit at the heart of the ocean food web. Some, like these delicate snails, form shells. It's just one variety of pteropod, a species eaten by so many other creatures, they're called the potato chips of the sea. And that's why plankton expert Dave Mackes is so worried. If their shells dissolve, a critical part of the food web dissolves with them. And here in the North Pacific, surface waters are becoming more and more acidic.
The parts of the ocean that they live in are becoming corrosive for their shells. The area and the fraction of the year that the water is going to be corrosive, if we keep dumping CO2 into the atmosphere and into the ocean, the amount of available habitat for these things is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
For years, Mackes and his colleagues have been conducting plankton tows off the BC coast, monitoring various populations. And their findings suggest that every aspect of climate change, from warming to acidification, is hammering the pteropod population.
In one of our longest time series, it does look like the pteropods have declined. We are changing the temperature of the world. We are changing the chemistry of the ocean. So I think it's actually a bit of a mistake to say, what is the one smoking gun? It's kind of like asking, if the apocalypse is coming, are you worried about the war, the famine, or the pestilence? Which one's going to kill you? Well, Any one of them could, and together their cumulative effect is almost certainly far worse than their individual effect.
And pteropods aren't the only creatures on the front line. Other plankton species build protective shells, and if they disappear, the bottom of the food chain will take a major hit.
Certainly, if we affect the base of the food chain, that will have a dramatic impact on the top of the food chain that we are concerned about. The fish, the mammals, the birds that we know and love. The whales are directly dependent on the food resources from the base of the food chain.
There was a mass extinction 55 million years ago, and the oceans became acidic, but the difference now is that our experiment, we're burning carbon so rapidly. We're doing this at least 10 times faster than any time in the past. You know, maybe 30 times faster. That's what we estimate.
And the geological record shows fairly clearly that in many cases, many of these species, particularly the calcifying species and the coral reef species, went extinct. And those ecosystems had to re-evolve. They had to start over again and re-evolve, taking anywhere from 2 to 10 million years for that to occur.
The conditions that led to that mass extinction look alarmingly similar to those evolving today. High temperatures, low oxygen, and increased acidity. The cause then seems to have been massive volcanic eruptions that filled the atmosphere, then the ocean, with carbon dioxide. The future cause may be us. So is mass extinction the inevitable fate of the global sea? The waters near an ancient Mediterranean volcano may hold the answer. It towers like a menacing giant over the city of Naples and the Mediterranean Sea. Vesuvius is still an active volcano, and its impact can be felt 30 kilometers away in the waters off the island of Ischia. Marine ecologist Jason Hall Spencer has been studying the ocean just off the Iskian coast, and what he's discovered may be a microcosm of the future sea. Thanks to Vesuvius, this small patch of ocean is saturated with carbon dioxide.
It's pretty amazing to look at, actually, because there's a load of bubbles bubbling up from the seabed that are carbon dioxide. And the reason that's happening is that chalk is being boiled by the volcano of Vesuvius, the famous volcano. It's driving this chalk up, and it's coming up at normal temperature, but it's acidifying the water around it, just like we're doing to the planet worldwide with increasing CO2. And this is a way of looking into the future of the planet's ecosystems, because naturally this area has been acidified for millennia.
Today, Hall Spencer and his colleagues are heading out to the CO2 vents to collect specimens and check on an experiment being conducted by seagrass expert Maria Cristina Buya. It's just one of many studies they've done, assessing the impact of carbon dioxide on everything from plankton and shellfish to corals and urchins.
I think we know anyway that the CO2 increases the growth of the seagrass, but we want to know how that affects the knock-on effects to the other marine life.
Go.
At first glance, it looks like a lush green environment. But look a little closer and another picture begins to emerge. Because of the CO2 bubbling into these seagrass beds, the acidity level here is close to that predicted for the end of the century. Seagrass loves this environment because all that CO2 acts like a fertilizer. But Hall Spencer has conducted detailed animal surveys here, and the results are troubling.
We've actually counted every single organism we can find and found that there's a 30% reduction, a crash in the biodiversity of the area. All the things that should be there, reproducing and growing well, have gone. And it's like comparing a desert to a rainforest.
And the shelled creatures that do make their way into the vents don't last long.
I tried to collect these intact. Normally with a limpet you can get the whole animal.
Yeah.
It's easy, but these are they're so thin. They're just
that you broke.
Yeah, they're just breaking in my hands. They just open up, you know.
So in this way it's possible to see. Yes.
They're recruited into the site. They think there's lots of food, fertilized by this CO2, but it's their graveyard. They just they just dissolve and die.
They don't resist.
Oh.
The seagrass tells a similar story. This sample was collected in a normal environment. This one from inside the vents.
Maintain the normal condition. You have a lot of corallinacee algae, okay? These crusting algae, white, pink.
It's just completely different, isn't it? This is covered in chalk and a diversity of life that's made of calcium carbonate.
Yeah.
Whereas the ones you collected from inside the high CO2 area.
Green, completely green.
Yeah.
Without anything.
All of these species have been lost from the area. I mean, it looks healthy to me, this grass. It looks like it's growing well, but unfortunately all of these species have gone. It can't be good for the ecosystem at all.
No.
But strangely enough, there are still fish in these waters. So does that mean these creatures will survive in a high CO2 sea?
Certainly when you see these sites with fish swimming around through the CO2 bubbles, then maybe the whole fishing industry will breathe a huge sigh of relief, go, okay, there's plenty of fish in the future, doesn't matter how much CO2 you pump into the sea. Unfortunately, that's a false view. What's happening is the fish are able to swim in and out of this very high CO2 area that we've got here, but they cannot reproduce there. They take advantage of the increased productivity that CO2 has. It fertilizes the plants, so herbivorous fish come in to feed, but they certainly don't lay their eggs there. And some experiments that are going on at my laboratory show that the very early life history stages of fish are vulnerable in their development to high CO2 levels.
The CO2 level here isn't as high as those reached during past mass extinctions, but research suggests that it's high enough to result in a massive loss of life.
While I'm saying I don't know what the future is, what I can do is say that the sites we're studying, it doesn't look good, and if we carry on doing what we're doing, it looks bad because, for example, corals have gone. For example, all of the calcified organisms have gone, and that's bound to affect the whole food chain right up to fish and mankind.
And if that chain of life unravels, then the nurturing sea, the one that gave us life, will change beyond all recognition.
Previously, the oceans were able to adjust and buffer the effects of high CO2, so the pH didn't alter so much. But now we're ramping it up so quickly that it cannot adjust in time. And so that's the worry, because then the species that rely on the seawater around them, they're not protected from it, can't then reproduce and can't then live their lives as they should. It's not a case of running out of time. We've already pushed our ecosystems to a stage that they've been damaged irreversibly. And so if we can just, for goodness sake, reduce the amount of CO2 and the amount of energy we consume, then that's going to benefit the oceans worldwide.
If we can accept that humans are capable of changing things for the worse, then they should also be able to accept that they can change things for the better, individually, in small groups and collectively on a global scale. If we can mess it up, we can fix it.
The decisions that we make in our generation over the next 20 to 30 years will impact hundreds of generations of mankind in the future. So we better get this right, and we better get this right now.
I'm a father and a grandfather, and I'm very concerned that we leave this for them in a state that they can appreciate, that they can utilize, not one where they look back and say, this generation didn't do its job.
But in a way, I think we're just visitors on this planet. Our species won't be here forever. That even if we kill off the things that we need to survive on, other things will then be able to cope with that and carry on without us. And that cheers me up. It sounds strange, but it's true.
So, how will our species be remembered? Perhaps as one that formed a new partnership with the ocean and its astonishing creatures, embracing the sea as it embraces us and our planet. If not, then it may be us and thousands of other species that pay the ultimate price. The ocean itself will endure, as it always has, source waters of the planet and the cradle of new life.